Ronnie Stanley gave his thoughts on Emery Jones and his first snaps as a member of the Baltimore Ravens offensive line. Talk about that and so much more coming up on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Ravens. Welcome into the show. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the #1 sports podcast network. Thanks so much for being here, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day, whether you're an everyday or a first-time listener or you're somewhere in the middle. Thanks so much for your support and for tuning in. We have 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens coverage here for you. We have a jam-packed episode today. As we talked about some Ronnie Stanley comments on yesterday's bonus episode about what he had to say about the run game, and they were intriguing. But today I want to talk about more Ronnie Stanley comments, this time about Emry Jones, dive into his performance a little bit there as well. We'll also talk about what Ronnie had to say about the Ravens offense in general a little bit more. And in the second part of the show, Dre'Mont Jones got fined and he ripped it. But I want to also just talk about Baltimore's defense a little bit more and what we've seen, because a lot of the attention has been on the offense after Thursday night. I want to do a dive into the defense a little bit more because we've talked about it, but obviously the offense has been the thing we've been talking about more. Than finally, we'll just ask the question, can the Ravens fix their issues? We'll dive into all that and more on today's show. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, they'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Well, we know one of the big storylines, since we've talked a lot about Lamar Jackson, a lot about the run game, etc. The Ravens made an offensive line change over the course of this game against the Bengals in Week 13, which again was a horrible, no good, very bad game. But the Ravens, they finally did it. And it wasn't Daniel Falele like everybody wanted, but Andrew Voorhees was another guy that people were circling because he hasn't played well this season. And Emry Jones stepped in a rotation. John Harbaugh hinted at that leading up to this game. And lo and behold, that's what happened. Emry Jones stepped in on certain drives, had a holding penalty, but I thought overall played decent. And Ronnie Stanley, after the game, he talked about Emry Jones and his performance, and was very short and sweet with his answer, but I think a powerful message was on display here. He said, I thought he played great besides the one penalty, but the effort he gave, he showed that he can play in this league essentially, or play this league essentially, is what Ronnie said there. And again, not a lot of words from Ronnie on Emry Jones, but I still think that they appreciated the effort that he gave out there. And I don't know if this is going to be a long-term thing, a long-term rotation, if Emry Jones is going to get the starting job from Andrew Voorhees. I'm not really sure, but at the end of the day, it does say a lot about, I think, how the Ravens view Voorhees. I think Falele, that's obviously their guy. Falele is their guy, despite the fact that we all see it with Falele. We all see it with Voorhees too. Falele is the one that kind of gets all the attention, but this is a multiple person problem on the offensive line. And I thought it was interesting, actually, Emry Jones in his comments after the game on his role, or what essentially the process was leading up to this. Apparently, they didn't tell him, oh, you're playing this week. He apparently said he's just preparing every week as if he's going to be playing. So I guess a little bit out of left field here based off the transcripts, what Emry Jones had to say here. So, he talked about how he was trying to focus on the process, and they have the O-line on a strict process, he said, and doing their best to keep them focused. But, he said he's focused on getting out there, and he said that he was happy for the opportunity rotating, and he said he's been a lot of work, a lot of time he had to wait to get healthy. So he was asked if it was challenging to be in a rotating role, and didn't necessarily answer the question. He more just again said he was happy for the opportunity. But he himself said that he thought he had a good night. He mentioned the holding call and said that he wished he could get that one back. But other than that, he said he felt like he played pretty decently. Now, the stats from PFF came out after the game, and Emry Jones had a 67.6 pass block grade, and he had a 45.6 run block grade. So he was not wonderful in the run block. I mean, he actually was the worst graded run blocker on the Ravens. So that's one thing. And again, like some people love PFF, other people don't like PFF. I thought Jones, again, like I thought he played decent. Wasn't great, wasn't terrible. I thought it was just kind of like, yeah, first NFL action for a guy. And especially coming off an injury, waiting to get healthy. There was some good and there was some bad. So that's what I was expecting. It was nothing too crazy there. But I just think that if you're, again, I've said this, I've never been a fan of the rotation. Like, I've never been a fan. If you want to play a guy, especially on the O-line when John Harbaugh preaches continuity. And that's literally what he said a couple of weeks ago when talking about it. And, you know, it was just talked about and preached the entire year, it feels like. And like rotations are the last thing on the definition sheet of continuity of rotating guys in and out. So just for other context in the pass block grade department, Tyler Linderbaum, 85.1, Roger Rosengarten, 83.7, Ronnie Stanley, 81.3, Andrew Voorhees, 70.8, and Daniel Falele, 60.6. So Falele had the worst pass block grade out of any Ravens offensive lineman, including Emry Jones. And then for the offensive line in the run blocking department, Daniel Falele was actually the highest graded lineman there with 75, Roger Rosengarten, 73.4. Then you have actually Corey Bullock got in here with 67, a 67 grade. And then you have other guys like Andrew Voorhees, 57.9, Linderbaum, 57.5, Stanley, 53.5, and then obviously Emry Jones, 45.6. So, you know, I think when talking about the Ravens run game, and like I've talked about the fact that it was very weird, the game plan at times. They had a lot of big runs in this game, or at least a decent amount of them, not like anything overly crazy, especially the 2 touchdown runs. But at the same time, like there's still that predictability factor I've been talking about the whole season where the Bengals were stacking the box, obvious run call, and, you know, Henry gets stuffed for no gain or 1 yard or whatnot. So, you know, I think that now with the mini bye, if the Ravens are truly committed to making a change there on the O-line, again, like I've been saying, this is the last week that I think you can do that or should do that. I mean, they can do it anytime they want to, but this makes the most sense for it. So maybe they were just seeing what Emry Jones brought to the table. And while Voorhees outperformed him in the run game and the pass game, you know, maybe they just feel like they need to switch something up because it's still not working. And we'll dive into the final part of the show about like, can they even fix this issue? Is Emry Jones the magical fix? And, you know, the hope is that with his first NFL action behind him, getting that experience, it'll only get better for him as he continues to go out there and get snaps and learn. But that's the question, right? Is he going to be able to? I mean, Ronnie Stanley clearly thinks he can play. The Ravens clearly wanted to give him a shot to see what was up. But, you know, if you're Andrew Voorhees, what are you thinking right now? You know, does that give you confidence to go back out there and perform? I mean, you have to, you know, you have to kind of block all that out. But, you know, if I'm Andrew Voorhees, I'm not feeling too good about that. Now, his play hasn't justified him keeping his job, but the problem is the Ravens just don't really have a lot of options. Emry Jones, essentially, unless you want to throw in Corey Bullock or Ben Cleveland, Emry Jones is kind of your guy there. So Ravens are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place here, and we'll have to see how that unfolds. Stanley also talked a little bit more about the offense. Again, we talked about his other comments about the run game, where seemed like, at least from what he had to say, he was encouraging and the offense was encouraging the coaches to call some runs. But, you know, that we talked about that yesterday. And I'm curious to hear if Stanley will clarify those comments, because that's what I heard. And he said, again, yes, that's definitely part of it. The collaboration part, wanting to get back to the run. That's something that we encourage the coaches to do when we come back to the sideline, but we're still going to go out there and run whatever play is called. So, I mean, I don't want to read too far into it, but seems like Stanley in the offense, you know, hey, we'll run whatever play is called, but yeah, maybe we should run the ball. Like, let's do this, or let's do that. And that is a collaboration part. And I'm very glad the Ravens do that with the coaches and the players. But Stanley expressed some confidence about the offense bouncing back. And, you know, he talked about that there's not necessarily one thing in particular why the offense hasn't clicked as a whole this season. But he said, I just know that I believe and I'm confident that we're going to figure it out. I know we are, because I'm going to make sure that this offense gets going the way it's supposed to be. And honestly, like, regardless of how you feel about the offense, whether you're very confident it is or not, it's really cool to hear Stanley say this, especially with him being one of the veterans on that offensive unit. He's obviously the veteran on that line. And to hear him say that, I'm not going to take anything away from him from that. Like that was really cool. And he talked about not leaving anything unanswered, making sure all the questions are asked and making sure everyone knows what we're going to do in any situation. So, I mean, that seems like a lot of fundamental stuff, which, John Harbaugh talked about, and we talked about it for the Friday show, how he kind of took accountability for the turnovers, which is like, whoa, John Harbaugh took accountability, but he took accountability for the wrong thing. The turnovers, he's not going out there fumbling the ball, but essentially his message was, if that message is not coming across, that is on him, which is accurate. But if that message isn't coming across, that's a pretty big issue and a fundamental thing. So I don't know. Just the Ravens have seemed to have lost their identity here on the offensive side of the ball. Obviously, the O-line is an issue. Lamar's health situation, that's obviously a big storyline. Wide receivers with your top two guys combined for 2 catches for 6 yards. The run game having some chunk plays, but then having some not so great plays. And Rashid Ali out snapping all the running backs on the roster who were active and healthy. So many things, but maybe it's Emry Jones' time at left guard. We are going to see. But coming up in the second part of the show, we'll talk about Dre'Mont Jones reacting to the wild fine that he got for something he did in the Jets game. But more so, I want to dive into the defense as a whole a little bit, because I want to give them some shine and talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly we saw from them in Week 13 against the Bengals and what they can do moving forward. So stay tuned. Plenty coming your way on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. For a shot at a bigger payout, it keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And for me in the NBA, big Denver Nuggets guy over here. And I will say right now on FanDuel with the NBA championship odds, Denver currently second, only behind the Oklahoma City Thunder. The Nuggets at plus 700, the Thunder at plus 140, which makes sense because they're the defending champions and dominating. But the Nuggets have done really well this season too so far. And I like that plus 700 number over on FanDuel, considering I think that once the Nuggets get some pieces back, they could be even more dangerous. So right now, FanDuel's giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play our game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Moving along on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on the Sunday bonus edition of the show. Appreciate everybody for taking some time out of your weekend and spending some time with me, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. Maybe you're driving back from your Thanksgiving festivities, or you're getting ready to watch some football. Maybe you are watching some football and have some Ravens content coverage. You're listening to that here. However you're watching or listening, and wherever you're watching or listening, thank you so much for all of the support. We have 5 days a week plus more here of Locked On Ravens. So the regular show is Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern time. Tomorrow will be episode 1,651 consecutively for me, dating back 2019. I've never missed an episode of the show. We also have bonus episodes on the weekend when there are headlines to talk about, and during the season there usually are. It's very rare we don't have a bonus episode during the season. So we dive into all that. Plus we have the instant reaction shows after games and after pieces of big news. We have the watch-alongs during games, as well as Locked On Ravens Squad show twice a week with myself, Sam Njoku, and former Ravens receiver Kadri Ismail. So let's dive into this defense a little bit now, and we'll start it off with Dre'Mont Jones, because I do want to talk about Dre'Mont a little bit here at the start. But Dre'Mont Jones was fined, and these fines in the NFL can get a little bit crazy. And I think we saw a couple last year. Like, I think, didn't Patrick Ricard get fined like $40-something thousand and then got that fine? He appealed it and won. I mean, it gets a little crazy. So Dre'Mont Jones was apparently fined. He was fined $14,055 for an apparently violent gesture after a sack late in the Ravens' Week 12 win against the Jets. They always do the previous week's fine on the Saturday before the next week. So Dre'Mont Jones was fined, and essentially what he did is kind of did a "that's over" thing, but I guess the NFL thought it was like a neck thing. I don't know. And so Dre'Mont Jones was fined for that, and Dre'Mont Jones responded to it. He said, quote, "I was just saying it's over, like in a competitive sense, and now my kids are going to have Christmas gifts this year. Hashtag thank you, NFL." So come on, NFL. What are we doing here? I get that, violent stuff and violent gestures. Yes, that shouldn't be in the game. But, if you've seen anybody who's no, cut that. the gesture that he did essentially was that. But again, I guess the NFL saw it differently. And, that was back, the Ravens defense doing their thing against the Jets in that game. They did not do their thing against the Bengals. Well, they did in the first half. Obviously, the second half, it was not that great. And so when you look at the PFF because I want to talk about the pass rush, that's why I brought up Dre'Mont Jones first here. Dre'Mont Jones actually had the worst pass rush grade on the team against the Bengals in week number 13 with 45 on PFF here. Mike Green was second worst with 51, followed by Carl Lawson, who made his NFL debut, his Ravens debut. He's been around the NFL for a while, so my bad. NFL debut, no. Ravens debut, yes, for Carl Lawson. Roquan Smith, 51.9. John Jenkins, 52.7. Brent Urban, 53.6. Kyle Van Noy, 54.1. Okoye, 54.2. Peebles got in here, got 54.6. Travis Jones, 56. Nate Wiggins, 56.2. Teddy Buchanan, 57.4. Lohi Gilman, 58.4. Kyle Hamilton, 62. Trenton Simpson, 65.9. And Marlon Humphrey was the Ravens' best pass rusher. He got a sack with 79.8. So not a great sign when your pass rushers are all at the bottom or near the bottom of this list. And then your secondary members are the ones like Humphrey, Hamilton, Gilman, etc., like Wiggins. Those guys are up towards the top. Not really what you want. And for the Bengals, the offensive line has been a huge problem for them for years. But that has not actually been the case this season. The Cincy offensive line has not really been a problem for them this year. They've actually figured that unit out, and it showed on Thursday. The Bengals, it's weird to say that they have a solid offensive line, but they've played like it. So, I give a shout out to those guys because, again, that's something that everyone was talking about even dating back to the Penei Sewell versus Jamar Chase conversations in the draft, where the Bengals obviously took Chase and the Lions took Sewell. So the Ravens got stonewalled here by the Bengals. And I think that they showed a stat at halftime of the game, if I'm remembering it correctly, that Joe Burrow had his lowest pressure rate of either the season or his career. I'm not exactly sure, so don't quote me on that, but it was something along those lines. And we know that, when you are able to get that pressure on these that's what you have to do. You can't let these guys sit back in the pocket. And luckily, the Ravens defense in the first half was shutting it all down, right? Like they were getting the ball, the Bengals in good field position because of the offensive turnovers. And, they really couldn't get anything. And I say this on the watch along all the time when we're doing them, but it sometimes is a lot harder to score from the 3-yard line than the 13-yard line because the field shrinks essentially. And, the defense can kind of, it sounds weird to say, but they can cover more ground closer to the goal line. And so the Ravens have gotten very good at that, and the bend don't break style there. So the Ravens defense, they did their job in the first half, but obviously with the time of possession being the way it was, the Bengals held the ball for almost 40 minutes in this game. The defense was, I'm sure, tired out of their minds by the end of this one. And eventually, Joe Burrow was missing some throws early in the game, and Joe Burrow is Joe Burrow. So he's going to figure it out. He's Joe Burrow. And then once he did and Jamar Chase got cooking, Nate Wiggins left the game, it just got bad. But again, if you're not getting pressure on him, especially a quarterback we talk about this all the time with Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, Burrow, no particular order there, obviously. But I'm just saying, these star quarterbacks, you don't put pressure on those guys, they're going to slice and dice you up. It's a known fact that if you don't put pressure on those guys and you don't force them, and even if you do put pressure on them, it's game over for you too on a lot of those plays, but it's almost always game over when you don't put any pressure on them. So that was tough. And again, I give so much credit to this defense for keeping the offense attached in this game that easily by halftime could have been 21-0 or something. It could have been bad, especially with the field position that the Bengals were getting. But even still, they had 19 third down opportunities and converted on 8 of those. So under 50%. But, the third down conversion started to get a lot more timely as the game went on. And while the Ravens did have one more drive and they averaged more yards per play, they averaged more yards per pass, they averaged more yards per rush, the Ravens did. So the defense was still okay, you're getting some stops, but it felt like the timely plays, especially on those third downs in the second half. It's all right, here's a 3rd and 8, here's a 3rd and 3. And it was just okay, Jamar Chase first down, or Mike Gesicki first down, or, felt like as the game went on, those momentum plays that the Ravens were getting started to shift pretty heavily in the Bengals' favor. And so I still like the way this defense, and there are still problems with the defense. I mean, yes, the pass rush being one of them in this game. I still don't like how they play super off in certain situations. They definitely have a missed tackling problem. They overrushed on a play, which resulted in a huge Bengals play. Like, there are still problems, especially the missed tackling one. But I don't know where this team would be without the defense the last 3 weeks. And the thing is that, you were playing teams. We have to be honest about this too, right? They were playing teams that they should have beaten and should have been able to beat up on in the past 5, right? Their 5-game win streak where you play the Bears are a good team. So like that was an impressive performance. The Rams game too, like, you got those 2 back to back, or I guess it was sandwiched with the bye week in there. But, the Dolphins and the Vikings and the Browns and the Jets, like those are games that you're supposed to look like your defense is supposed to look good against those teams. And for the most part, they did. They did what they were supposed to do. And I'm like, hey, all right, cool. But you're going to have a lot better offenses coming through here. And this was a Bengals offense without T. Higgins. And we saw like Mitchell Tinsley, who has actually been he stepped up for the Bengals at points this season. He had a terrible game. And that was the difference, like between having a Tinsley and a Higgins, where Higgins probably doesn't stop his route and catches that early touchdown that was happening early in the game. Or, he makes a couple of those contested catches that Tinsley couldn't come up with. And even with all that, in the second half, the defense did falter. So, if Nate is out, that's definitely a concern. Obviously, Marlon struggles with Ja'Marr Chase. He has in the past. And, that's a difficult matchup. And even Nate was, like Ja'Marr Chase is Ja'Marr Chase, right? It is what it is, especially when Joe Burrow is throwing the football. But now with teams like the Bengals, and look, I mean, the Steelers, they have dudes on that offense, although they're not as high-powered as the Bengals. But then you got to play the Patriots with Drake May, who's been balling, the Packers with Jordan Love and Josh Jacobs and all those guys. And then, you have another game against the Bengals and the Steelers in there as well. So the defense, we saw that against worse offensive units or not so great offensive units. Yeah, they're able to shut it down. And that's great. Like, you're supposed to do that. But you're not going to be playing the Browns in the playoffs if you get there, or the Jets in the playoffs if you get there. And while, you're not necessarily like, does Denver have the best offense in the world? No. But they certainly have one of the best defenses in the world, something that the Bengals do not. And again, the Bengals played like out of their minds defensively in this game. And again, the Ravens, they beat themselves. The Bengals, they played a heck of a game. Like, everything can be true there. But, if you do win this division, which again, to me is the only path for this team to make the postseason, you're probably going to be playing a team that either has a great offense or a great defense. And there was actually a stat by Marcus Mosher that I've read out on this show. He's the host of Locked On Cowboys. So shout out to Marcus. But he kind of contextualized the Ravens defense with a single tweet. And I thought it was interesting with what he had to say about the Ravens, because right now the Ravens have given up 31.7 points per game against the following quarterbacks: Josh Allen, Jared Goff, Patrick Mahomes, CJ Stroud, Matt Stafford, Caleb Williams, and Joe Burrow. They've given up 13.6 points per game against Tua Tagovailoa, Joe Flacco, the Cleveland version of Joe Flacco, Dylan Gabriel, JJ McCarthy, and Tyrod Taylor. I'll tell you right now, none of those guys in the second half of that list are walking through the door in the postseason. The guys in the top half are. Most all of them are. So you're going to have to prove it. And, Aaron Rodgers is probably like in the middle of those 2 tier lists, in my opinion. But then, like I mentioned, it's Burrow, it's May, it's Love, and, then you got Rodgers again. Like, you have to step it up here against better quarterbacks. That, to me, I need to see them. I need to see that they can show me that against better quarterbacks. So coming up in the final part of the show, we're going to talk about if the Ravens can even fix their issues, if there's any hope for them here, because the season is definitely not over, but can they fix their issues in time? We'll talk about that and a lot more coming up on Locked On Ravens. Back here, Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher, rounding out the Sunday edition episode here, this bonus episode of the show. So if you have a friend or a family member that wants daily Ravens coverage, or is a Ravens fan and, is looking for a place that talks Ravens all the time, 5 days a week and more, be sure to send them over here our way on Locked On Ravens. And also you can follow me over on social media at ChaosStriker34, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, the whole 9 yards. I actually had a post on social media yesterday that what a lot of people are talking about it, and it's the running back snaps from the Ravens Week 13 loss to the Bengals, or as I mentioned it earlier in the show, Rashod Ali outsnapped both Derrick Henry and Keaton Mitchell, almost combined. Henry and Mitchell luckily combined outsnapped him, but unfortunately individually not the case. Ali 29 carries, Henry 24, Keaton Mitchell 8. I get the whole thing about, you wanting a pass protection back out there. Those snaps Ali had would probably go to Justice Hill, but there's no world where Rashod Ali should be taking that many snaps in the game. And, Derrick Henry and Keaton Mitchell get kind of phased out a little bit over the course of the game. Like that shouldn't be happening. To me, that's inexcusable, regardless of how much they ran or didn't run. So that's a different conversation. And I'm sure John Harbaugh will be asked about that at his next media availability, and we'll talk about that here on the show. But hey, even still, the Ravens, they need to get back on track in week number 14 against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Hopefully, the Bills take care of business today and help the Ravens out, because the Ravens need the Steelers to lose in a bad way before their matchup next week. But can the Ravens even fix their issues? My answer to this is yes and no, personally. It's yes and no. Because, I think the way that this works is they're 6-6 right now. I mentioned it at the end of the second segment. Like the division is the way for them here. That's the way. But while there are certain things, and because we saw the defense fix their issues, right? Like we saw that. But I think the defense had the personnel to do it, and they added in a guy like Dre'Mont Jones and added in a guy like Alohi Gilman. It would have been really cool if they could have added somebody else, but those two moves in a vacuum individually have helped this defense, and there are no ifs, ands, or buts about that. But offensively, my concern for both Lamar Jackson and the offensive line is, look, we can talk about Lamar's health situation. It gets people really riled up, I've noticed as well. So, there's just a lot of differing opinions on Lamar's health. But, depending on how healthy or not healthy Lamar Jackson is, does he have enough time, if he's not healthy, to heal up? Is this mini buy enough to get him the rest that he needs to feel good enough again, if that's what his situation is, with all the injuries he's been listed with on the injury report? Sometimes you just have stuff that lingers throughout the season. And Lamar's talked about how it's kind of his first time dealing with something like this before. And, it's a difficult situation to kind of navigate for the first time, I'm sure. And I think it's something Isaiah Likely's navigating right now with his foot injury, kind of trying to come back from that. There are a couple of things that with injuries, it just takes a while, or sometimes you just have to deal with it throughout the season. And I think Lamar, being a warrior, fighting through whatever he's fighting through here, that to me is like, all right, but what is it is the thing in the situation. So, I didn't look as gimpy or as, didn't look as beat up in this Bengals game as he did against the Jets, where I think he was clearly feeling it in that Jets game. I didn't see as many of those moments. I can't even remember a time I actually did see it in the Bengals game. But even still, you just have to hope he's as close to 100% as possible. The problem to me is the offensive line, though. For all the Lamar stuff that's being said right now and everything. And again, Lamar's still a phenomenal quarterback. One bad stretch is not going to change my mind on that. Certainly people have come out of the woodwork and have talked about it, but the offensive line, I don't think they have the personnel to fix their issues. Even during that Super Bowl season in 2012, when they made the offensive line change, they don't have a Bryant McKinney on this roster. They just don't. Because again, like I said, Daniel Falele is getting a lot of the brunt for this. And I mean, deservedly so. Falele hasn't played well this season for the most part, but it is far from just a Daniel Falele problem on that line. Like Voorhees has been a massive problem. Roger Rosengarten's regressed in a really big way. Ronnie Stanley's had great games and he's had poor games. And Linderbaum, I think, is being affected by all of it. So this is a 5-man job here on the O-line. You got to protect your quarterback. And, I don't think they have the resources to fix it, because especially with the offensive line, every team needs good offensive linemen. That's what I talked about during the trade deadline. I'm like, look, I love Kevin Zeitler. I would love Kevin Zeitler back in Baltimore. And I wish they would have done it at the deadline. But, even for the Titans, like, are you going to give up a guy that's protecting your young rookie quarterback? And even though it's a lost season, like, you want to give your young rookie quarterback the absolute best resources to succeed. And Kevin Zeitler is that. That's why they signed him in the first place. So every team needs good offensive linemen, and no one is willing to give them up. The only deadline trade for an O-lineman during this deadline was Trevor Penning from the Saints to the Chargers. So, it just right now, you look at that line and there's no Marshall Yonder walking through that door. There's no Kevin Zeitler walking through that door. Bryant McKinney, anybody you want to put in that conversation. And we're in week 14 for the Ravens here. It's not like we're in week 3. Oh, it's still early in the season. I mean, we're almost done with the regular season at this point. And like I've said over and over again, your strengths get you to the playoffs. Weaknesses get you eliminated from the playoffs. And, while the Ravens can ride some of their strengths to the postseason here, hopefully, and again, like those strengths that once were for this team for years seemingly are not as potent anymore, not even strengths at this point right now, especially with heavier personnel. But their weaknesses are clear and apparent, and teams are just going to attack it over and over and over again if they can't fix it and figure it out if they do get to the postseason. So, again, my answer is yes to no. Like, some of the things I think that they can figure out. Like, obviously, the pass rush has been getting there despite a poor game against the Bengals. That's an issue that is continuing to get worked on. I think that they can fix the missed tackling on defense. I think that's something that they can work on as well. I think the predictability in the game plans on offense can get better. I think that they can fix that, and I think that they have the personnel to do it as well. But the O-line is that one where I'm just like, I really don't know. And depending on Lamar's situation here, to me, my personal opinion is he does not trust his offensive line. That is the worst place he can be as a quarterback. And I don't blame him. I mean, he's gotten hit a bunch. He's got like a hamstring and all the other bruises and bumps he's gotten. Like, it's been a rough year there. And whenever you're in that situation, things you've been doing for years, you just start second guessing because you wonder, okay, is contact about to come here and just like knock my socks off? So the season's not over. I want to make that very clear. I don't think the season's over, but they need to figure out these issues and fast because, if you lose this game to Pittsburgh, you fall to 2-2 in the division, you have to play for the tiebreaker in week 18. That's a tough spot to be in. This Pittsburgh game is most definitely the most important game of their season. And honestly is going to dictate quite a lot for this team. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning into the show on the web. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe button in video form and follow along and subscribe in audio form for 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens coverage. Coming up tomorrow, I'll be back with the regular show. So be sure to stay tuned for that, 6 a.m. Eastern time, and I'll see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens.